Okay, so Christian responses. How do we respond to this? Well, as an apologist, I'm going to be sharing some things that I think are very helpful in the way that we deal with this. And I'll give you a spoiler alert. So, right up front, we don't change anybody. None of us have the power to change anyone. That relies on the person's response to God. And but the other side of that is that I don't believe, other than God pouring out His Spirit and we seeing a revival that just sweeps across the land, we have to look at this as winning one person at a time. That's how we do this. It's by our interaction with individuals, our conversations with individuals, and that's the way that I deal with it. I'd love to have a magic wand. Just wave it over everybody and everybody changes. Wouldn't that be great? Think the way I think. I don't want that to happen. So, yeah, it's a task. I used to say, apologetics is heavy lifting. And I say I used to say that, even though I've just said it again. I think that scares more people away than recruits more people. It requires some effort. It requires a good bit of effort to learn something new, and the way that we have learned, when I say we, especially Western culture, has not been to think. Everything in Western culture, especially as video and all the different ways. I've got two things right here. I've got a phone. How many TVs are in a house? We are so geared toward learning through our eyes by watching video rather than listening and having to reason or reading, which I think is the best form of helping your mind, though. Just helping people who are live streaming this or watching this on live stream. Some of you are here, don't know me. This is the first time you're here with us. It requires some effort, but thinking requires effort. And most of us don't use our minds to think. Listen, reason is a friend of truth. Just think of that. If you walk out of here with nothing else, just walk out of here with that. That reason is the friend of truth. And without truth, we're lost. There's no other compass to walk by. And I read a lot. Admittedly, I read quite a bit. And I also listen to books on this app called Audible. And Audible is a good way to get some information in, and it takes time. When I first went to seminary, uh, it was old school. There was no high tech anything. Copy machine was like, this is in the year 2002. It was just that the seminary didn't upgrade or think that there was value in kind of simulcasting classes to other places, like Asbury Seminary was doing in the early 2000s. They would have college places out there, and they would simulcast their classes through video. And at that time, our seminary was building a building that was built on a 1950s mentality. They had to retrofit video cables and other other things in the school after it was built, which was not forward thinking that way. But nevertheless, it still not today. It has one of the best online programs I think anywhere. But when I went to class, I was 52 when I went back to school. Some of you know that. Some of you thought I was crazy, thought I'd lost my mind and gone wandering off into the wilderness. But I would have to, when I was taking notes, I couldn't let my mind wander because the subjects were so new to me that if I let my mind wander, I got lost. And then, like, the rest of the class was like, blah, 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 blah. And I would think, where am I? Like, so it trained me to pay attention. What a concept. Paid me to actually listen and try to make sense of what was being said, not just to write it down. And that's why I say that it's heavy lifting, because we're not trained to do that in school anymore. And we're not trained, certainly in our culture, to do that. It requires some effort to make the change. And so here's my challenge for you: to read one book a month. Just one book a month, every month. At least 200 pages.
Can you define the book?
Can I define? You mean, will I give you the book?
No. Will you define what a book is? Because there could be novels, there could be teaching books, there could be.
I'll tell you what. Okay, gotcha now. I understand you. To read a book that has to do with apologetics or philosophy or theology, but just read a book that makes you stretch your mind a little bit. Most of us buy books that we're familiar with, and we know where the author's going by just reading the table of contents. And many of us read books according to a subject that we know so well. We know what he's going to say on the next page. We know where he's going. If that's all we do, you'll never grow mentally. Or
So when you read, do you read every single word, or how do you read?
no, I actually read every word.
Do you read every
I do. I learned how to speed read when I was in seminary. Okay, my first semester, 6,000 pages in 13 weeks. First semester. Second semester, 8,000. So it was either do or die. Basically, that's what it was. I had to read 800 pages of Thomas Aquinas' selected writings, Penguin Classic. You know what Penguin Classic means? 6-point type. That's what Penguin Classic means, 6-point type. And 800 pages gets multiplied to about 1,600 pages if you want to think of 12-point type. So, there are good books to read that are outside, some historical books, some biographies that are good books. But the way that you make your mind grow is by exercising it. And just think of that. If you go to the gym and you're always lifting the same amount of weight that you've always lifted whenever you've gone to the gym, it's not doing anything for you. As a matter of fact, there's a time that comes when it starts working against you. But if you could do this slowly, you don't have to do it in a month or a year. But just think, for the next year, you're going to read one book a month. Get somebody to read the same book with you and discuss it. Start a group that reads the same book, like, say, Voddie Baucham's book on fault lines. Don't pick the one on postmodernism. Yeah.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. So, in the scripture, for example, and I would like for you to just help us find the balance between what kind of philosophy to read. Because, for example, in 1 Corinthians, Paul spoke about the Gospels is foolishness to the Greeks who are enamored with philosophy. As defined by James, earthly wisdom. As defined by Paul and Colossians, don't let any man beguile you by philosophy. So, where do we find the balance?
Yeah.
Because I really think of trying to attributes of God. In his introduction, he spoke about how philosophy has helped him, right? And Jonathan Edwards was a great philosopher, right? But he was also the father of American liberalism, right? So where do we find the balance? How can we how, philosophy is just reasoning. How can we learn, or should we, learn philosophy? How can we learn philosophy, and how can we keep it, um, whatever we're reading,
Yeah.
in subjection to the scripture?
Yeah, C.S. Lewis would be someone I would point to as basically bordering on the line of good philosophy. And one of the statements he said, good philosophy must exist for no other reason to recognize bad philosophy. And so if you read good philosophy, and I could probably give you a couple of books to read that would be good philosophy. I would give you names of people that would be good philosophy. Because I studied and was a major part of my studying, I'm a Thomist when it comes to philosophy. Thomas Aquinas and his philosophy, and I'm an amateur when it comes to it. I don't have a PhD in it, but I think I know enough of Thomas to understand his reality. Um, what the writers of the New Testament were writing about was philosophers who had become almost self-help teachers and basically had misused philosophy in the philosophical sense. Paul read all of them because he would quote them, so he had to know them from someplace. And he read their poets, and so on. So give you the idea, the breadth of his knowledge was far beyond what we think. It wasn't just the Old Testament, that's for sure. But there is good philosophy to read out there. Bill Craig, William Lane Craig. They're not easy to read, but it helps you break the back of those things. I don't think that, well, Bertrand Russell was probably the leading philosopher in the 20th century that was an atheist. But when he got off the subject of theism, he wrote good philosophy. He had a fairly good understanding of it. But just the idea that you learn to think and reason is really what I'm after to help people think. Ed Feser, Feser, has written some contemporary things about Thomistic philosophy. It's excellent. He's one of the best, I think, one of the best writers out there today. And Thomistic philosophy is also called moderate realism. So basically, it's common sense philosophy. And it when I first went to seminary, I didn't want to have anything to do with philosophy because of some of the verses I'd read in the Bible. But I was won over um, because of it. And I started doing my devotions in Aquinas' writings because it was so good theologically, and it helped me understand how to think differently than my 20th century upbringing. So, yeah. So there's good philosophy and there's bad philosophy. There is. Yeah.
Quick
Well,
question.
go ahead.
Would you still recommend books by Ravi?
Yes. Yeah, I would. The question was, would I still recommend books by Ravi? Yeah, I wouldn't disown him. Paul wrote about. He said, "I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth." And I think I have a lot of experiences and read a lot of things, and I wouldn't say that everything he wrote was somehow tainted by what he was secretly or in his life. A lot of what he wrote helped me and built a lot for me. So there are some things that I would recommend them, but I would recommend them with an asterisk next to it, and say if this is something that would color what you're going to read, then don't read it.
Was it ever proven that he was guilty?
You know, it's never been proven in a sense in a court of law.
Was there enough evidence after the fact? It's hard to defend yourself when you're dead.
Yeah, there seems to be enough. There seems to be a mountain of evidence. There does seem to be.
Can you explain what you're talking about?
We talk about Ravi Zacharias after he died. There was one or two instances before that people brought up charges against him that were of a sexual nature, And then after he was dead, he was people brought up. Well, there were witnesses that were all interviewed. Again, everything was private. And let me just say this: that they accused him of things that he shouldn't have done. At this point, that's all I'm willing to say online. On up
There's a
front.
good interview with Josh McDowell. He had a lot of really insightful things to say.
Josh McDowell.
Josh
Yeah.
McDowell, there's on YouTube.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to, with regards to Ravi, is that knowledge in of itself is insufficient without love, right? And that's love towards God first, to your neighbor. And so, although he was gifted intellectually, it's my conviction that he was void of true saving faith and love towards God, given his pattern of life, right? And so I think that it's always good. It's always good to measure our knowledge and the motivations of why we're seeking to know, and if that motivation is squared with Scripture.
Yeah.
All have sinned.
Okay, let's move on. Yeah, we need one of those. That should go without saying. Okay, I mentioned these two books earlier on, and they both help understand how to deal with the things that are going on today. This is how I was introduced to Vadi Balkum, was through this book, Fault Lines. I'd heard him speak a number of times. He's a dynamic speaker, has spent most of his time in Africa, and just loves, I'm trying to think of the name of the nation that,
I think it's in Zambia.
Zambia is what it was. Yeah, I was teaching in a Bible college, a university in Zambia, and yeah, I think some of his children were even born there. Is that not? Yeah, yeah. So, but I can't keep up with him. He kind of,
I think he's in Texas now, right?
not even sure.
No, he's in seminary in Zambia.
In
He
Zambia,
went from Texas to Zambia.
Okay.
yeah.
That's where he's.
But he's an excellent writer. You could find him on YouTube. He deals with, YouTube, if you like watching videos, he's excellent with that. Abdu Murray, this book, Saving Truth, is just, it's one of those books that is a must read as well, because it deals with finding meaning and clarity in a post-truth world, says it all there. He's also an excellent speaker, does his stuff out there. Two books I didn't mention, and I think these two things really show you what culture is like. Apatheism by Kyle Bashirs is his name. He talks about apatheism, and he talks the meaning of apatheism is really people who are apathetic toward God. And he says because of the nature of America today, the culture is, when it comes to God, there's a question. You can contest the Bible, you can contest Christianity, you can contest every religion, and there's also a multitude of religions to choose from. And that's on the God side. On the other side, people are so distracted because of all of the things that are going on with technology. And the other one is that we are comfortable, and those things make us apathetic toward God. There's no need for God, so we can get along and say, who needs it? I did have a graphic for that was in Apatheism that he used. The other one is Disruptive Witness by Alan Noble, which is also a really good book. I do have one thing that I would not agree with that he said. He had a whole thing on mindfulness, which to me is part of Eastern meditation that's being slipped into our schools pretty much with young people, and the whole thing of mindfulness is based on meditation in yoga, and that's where mindfulness comes from. And it's you change the name of something and you think that changes what it is because you call it by something different. And I don't know where you stand on that kind of stuff, but Eastern meditation, nah. Oh, the two names of yeah. Oh, the first two. I'm sorry. So Fault Lines is by Vadi Baucham. Last name is spelled Baucham, and Vadi is Voddi. Is his first name, Vadi Baucham. And the second one is Abdul Murray. He's the guy who has a Muslim mother and an Irish father. So it's got a Saving Truth. I'm sorry, I didn't go back there. I'm running two different things here. Yeah, Fault Lines is Vadi Baucham, and Saving Truth is Abdul Murray. And these two, it's Kyle Beshears. Beshears is Beshears. He wrote Apatheism, and Disruptive Witness is Alan Noble. And I've saved the best for last. This is Os Guinness and Fool's Talk, Recovering the Art of Christian Persuasion. This is just excellent. I'll use some of his stuff just to talk about this. Os Guinness is he's a descendant of the Guinness beer empire. Yeah. But oh, I didn't advance there. Sorry. The reason why half of that screen is empty because I'm on the other half for people who are live streaming. Yeah. But Fool's Talk is just he. I don't know if you've read anything else by Os Guinness, but he's just such a prolific writer. Um, again, the guy quotes so many people. You tell how well read he is, and he just brings everything home. And I think he's probably one of the most fair-handed, even-handed people in talking about things that are in not contradiction, but contrasted with each other, sometimes contrary with each other. But it's an excellent book. Again, that's a good book to read philosophically, theologically, and apologetically. I think what he calls the Christian art of persuasion, um, or the art of Christian persuasion, he's talking about apologetics, how to talk to an unbeliever, and how that marries to evangelism, and how those two things should never be separate from each other. That you, if you don't have apologetics to lead to evangelism, um, a lot of times you don't have a place to start with evangelism. And yeah, so it's just I've read it probably 3 times now, maybe if you count listening to it, I'd say 4 or 5, because I've gone back over it. There's just so much to take. If I were taking notes on it, I'd have notebooks filled with his quotes. It's just an excellent book. Again, find somebody to read it with, or do a book club. I think we did one at my house for a while, where we had a few people who read through it together. So that was part of it.
His recent books too are speaking very much to 2022, 2021.
Yeah, he's a contemporary writer, so he's always writing. Um, he's always writing for the church and how the church should interact with the world. So he's always looking at the marketplace, what's going on in the marketplace, what's going on in culture. It's Western culture, and I really like him. I just picked up his book, the long journey home, which is written for seekers, and it's from the first paragraph on, the book just draws you right in, even though you know the Lord. He's just such a good writer, and that was written a while ago. It was written long before Fool's Talk was written, and yeah, the Dust of Death is what started it for me with Os Guinness, which was written in the '70s, I think, where he talked about what he was seeing as the decay of Western society, Western culture.
The journey home or the long?
The Long Journey Home, I think it is, if I'm not mistaken. It's not the long road home, but yeah. I just got it in the mail the other day because I heard him. He mentioned it in Fool's Talk, and I thought he's writing it for people who you think are searching or seeking, and that's really what they should be doing. Okay, so this is a quote from Fool's Talk. He says, "After all, Nietzsche and his postmodern disciples have surely won the moment for right now, and that is the battle for truth." Um, he says, "Nietzsche and his postmodern disciples surely have won the moment. Truth is dead, and everything is relative at best, and at worst, a matter of the will to power. Nothing is what it appears to be. If truth was once the stated goal of intellectuals, it is now easy to read between their scholarly lines and see the petty egos and dirty ambitions behind the lofty aspirations for truth." He says, "Truth is finally undecidable, as the postmodern philosophers express it. At best, truth is simply the compliment you pay to sentences that you happen to agree with." That's like zing. See, tell us what you really think. Um, but that is a good description of where we are today and how we're living today, what we're dealing with. Um, Here's a quote: "To tell the truth without ceasing to be generous." That was someone's goal for life. He said, to tell the truth without ceasing to be generous. Think it's a Christian or a non-Christian? Anybody know who that quote's from? It's a very famous quote. Does it make sense? That's speak the truth in love, isn't it? He says to tell the truth without ceasing to be generous. So in a conversation, to always be generous to the person you're talking to. Any guesses? Was it Nietzsche? Wasn't Thomas Jefferson? Wasn't Ben Franklin? Think more recent. It would be good if it was C.S. Lewis. Albert Camus. You know who Albert Camus is? Camus was, sorry?
Is he a psychologist?
No. No, he's a writer, wrote plays.
Oh, yeah.
He was an existentialist philosophically, but he was seeking his whole life. And it's very interesting. I haven't read all of Camus or all that he's written, but he has some very interesting. The man was tormented because he hated religion. Makes us think about what we present. And this is his statement about truth. Tell the truth without ceasing to be. So it goes to show you can't just always think that we know it. This is Os Guinness. "Apologetics itself has been charged is the art of always being right and therefore a matter of bad faith. Apologists are not out to understand but to win. Their argument owe more to their psychology than their theology. Some people simply need to be right, and they are the ones, it is said, who take to apologetics." I went to seminary with a bunch of these people. Want to learn arguments so that you can always win. Sad. Sad. Because we're not called to win arguments, we're called to win hearts. And there's a big difference between, I'd rather lose the argument, win the person, than win the argument and lose the person. But it doesn't mean, and Os Guinness goes on to say some other things. He says, the charge is unfair and wrong. A moment's thought would be enough to show how foolish the accusation is. If all forms of persuasion, notice the word, were to be suspect because they might represent a drive to be right, there would be no persuasion left, and ignorance would be the winner. He says, persuasion is both crucial to learning and to human growth, so this criticism would boomerang back against all forms of persuasion on behalf of any claim to truth.
Right. I saw a video in light of that. I don't even remember who the apologist was, but he was supposedly debating Deepak Chopra, and basically, rammed his argument down, and he just kind of sat there like it wasn't received at all. I mean, everything he said was true, but again, it was more about winning and trying to win. It was like it was so I hated to say it was so unimpressive.
Yeah.
It persuaded no one except if you were coming from that camp. You say, "Oh yeah, brother, yeah, preach it."
Yeah. I had a conversation with someone recently about another apologist or pseudo-apologist. I wouldn't really call him an apologist. He was debating Peter Singer. And I know Peter Singer's arguments. I mean, I've read everything. I should say I've read everything up to about 2010 that Peter Singer wrote. I haven't read things he's written since then. I know basically what he's going to say, though he's modified some of his beliefs along the way. And I watched this guy attack everything a Singer said and attack Singer as a person in his opening statement. And it was everything he said was off topic. It wasn't what the debate was about. The debate was about, does God exist? That was the question. And what the guy who was, I call him a pseudo-apologist because I don't think he had any training other than he was a public figure. So he started saying, what kind of world would we live in if Peter Singer had his way? And he started to describe, infanticide and animal rights and all these other things. So Singer gets up to the microphone. He says, I have no idea what he was talking about. I thought, debate over right there. You just, with one sentence, you just destroyed everything this guy did because he didn't show one proof for the existence of God. And anybody who's studied apologetics knows that you have at least 4 things that you could do to take up your 10 minutes without even struggling to do it. So what Os Guinness calls the art of persuasion, which I think is a good word, I think it's a good understanding of what we're trying to do. Paul uses the term in Acts 17, or Luke uses the term in Acts 17, where Paul showed evidence and persuaded the Jews at that time to see that Jesus was the Christ. And I think it's this idea of presenting evidence and doing it with love and doing it in a way that we do it. Those of you who have read Tactics by Greg Koukl, you can learn a lot from Greg Koukl. I think he has some things. I've been working on this series. Some of you have heard me do a thing, turning skeptics into seekers, and just keeps on growing as we learn how to do this thing. Yeah, he says if this is what Guinness says. He says if there were no sin, every conversation would be to seek truth together. In other words, if there was nothing wrong, if everybody was right, there would really be nothing to do, but we would just seek truth. But that's not the world we live in. We're always going to run into a nastier reality, and we have to learn how to live in that reality and how to defend these things. The other one is it truth at all costs? Um, Again, here's what Guinness says in this. He says, truth is crucial to persuasion, just as persuasion is crucial to truth. But it takes more than truth to be persuasive. And in the daylight between those two facts, there lies a gap through which every shape and size of demagogue, trickster, con man, snake oil salesman, and fraud can squeeze in with ease. I think that's really a good thing. I've shared before, I think I shared this in one of our seminars at least, where I was meeting with, this is after I graduated, finished my master's, hadn't started my doctorate at the time, but just had my master's. And I was meeting with one of the guys who was a barista in the coffee shop I used to go to. I used to go to the gym and then go over to the coffee shop and read, do some of my own studying. And this guy was the either assistant manager or manager, and I met with him for over 2 months, where we would meet probably 4 days a week, sit down, have a cup of coffee together, and just talk about all the subjects that I thought were helping persuade him. And he was very knowledgeable about world religions. He is actually a part-time professor at UNC Charlotte, and he was teaching world religions. So we had some really good really good conversations. And we became friends. His name was Jeff, by the way, and we were having a really good time. And one morning, I noticed when we were sitting there talking, there was a guy sitting at the table next to us. He was behind me, so he's over my shoulder. I couldn't see him, but Jeff could see him, and he could see Jeff. And I could see this guy, I could hear him, not see him, rustling in his chair. So a lot of times we would end a conversation with, like, good talk today, really enjoyed it. I really appreciated your point on this. And I think Jeff got up that morning and he said something like, well, I guess we have to search this out deeper, because I'm still not really convinced about this. Well, this guy gets up, and I could tell in the first two sentences he was a student at the seminary I went to. And he proceeded to say, well, I do know the truth, and blah, 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 and just started going. And I'm trying to run interference, like, I've been working with this guy for months, and you're going to tear down everything I've done because his argument was Christians are know-it-alls and not open to look at any other way. And I'm demonstrating to him I'm willing to converse and hear you and listen to understand. That's one of the things that, I learned early on. That you don't listen to answer, you listen to understand. And it was like, I could see Jeff's face was just like, and it was a sad moment. And that's the thing, that it's not truth at all costs when we're in the interaction, because it's easy to lose that person and you lose your opportunity. Yeah. And it's not like God only uses you or needs you. Yeah. So I did have conversations with Jeff after that, and all he did was talk about this guy. Yeah. Okay. So truth and virtue. The uniqueness of the message we share requires a corresponding uniqueness in how we share it. The old adage is, people don't care how much you know until what? They know how much you care. And if you can't demonstrate that you care about this person, as a human being, you're really not going to win anything, and I doubt they're ever going to become vulnerable to you sharing. And that's simply the way it works. If you think of the incarnation, that Jesus became one of us to go through what we go through so that we could look at his life and see what it was. He didn't come incognito in the sense of pretending to be someone else. He didn't try to fool us. I think there's a lesson there that we want to really understand. You know, I've shared again. It's been a while, so I'll mention some of these things again. If you remember the young woman Cassie J, who was the feminist, who was doing a documentary on the males rights movement, um, and she did a documentary where she filmed like 100 hours of these men who were part of the rights movements. And the long and the short of it was, what I got out of it was really good, was that she said that when she went back and she listened to or watched the videos, the footage that was being filmed, she said it simply like this. She said, I recognized I wasn't listening to what they were saying. I was anticipating. And she said, I was anticipating for them to give me an opening where I would pounce on them. Got you. And it changed her life. She said, and what I heard about it, how many times do you do that when you're in a conversation with somebody and you're anticipating, well, I know what they're going to say next. And as soon as they say it, it's like a gotcha moment. And who likes to get caught in a gotcha moment? Anybody just really enjoy that? Like, feel like you want to continue the conversation? No. So you listen to understand. And you understand so that you can converse and see if you can relate to where they are and what they're saying. That's the thing that we want to do, let alone to anticipate so we can pounce on them. Like, that's going to really help. There's a couple of things, and I'll get to them when we look at what time we got. Okay. Some of the deadliest challenges today to the Christian faith come from within the church itself. Yet in many parts of the church, Christian apologetics is weak, poorly understood, openly dismissed as an unworthy and wrong-headed enterprise. And sadly, that is true. I mean, you think I've been here since 2007. We've done, I don't know how many No-Pad Answer seminars have we done through that. We did 4 a year for 10 years, 3 a year for 10 years, and a conference once a year. There's still people didn't even know that it was going on, that live in New Jersey, that don't live more than 10 miles from here. And we've advertised radio. We've done all sorts of things. And I think, some of it is it's hard to hear. We've had world-class apologists at our conferences here. We've had guys who are A-lists apologists: Frank Turek, J. Warner Wallace, Norman Geisler, Natasha Crane, we didn't have Bill Craig here. The list could go on. Paul Copan was one of them. They're all A-list apologists. And we had women's conferences. We had women's conferences before women had women's conferences. We had 3 women's conferences here with one time 10 women speakers at the conference here. And they were good, weren't they? Well, today there are women holding women's apologetics conferences. There are more groups of women apologists doing things today. And I think some of it had to come from the time that we had them here, and we had them speaking here. Mary Jo Sharp, another terrific lady, who's been doing this. But I think that I went to this meeting with a group of pastors to talk about what's going on in the schools here in New Jersey and the things that are being presented to grade school kids. And I could tell by the one pastor who was sitting next to me that he didn't think that apologetics was really very helpful, not in the grand scheme of things. But I think he was a little bit more convinced by the time we were leaving. Yeah. we miss something? We're good?
The bullet item before not truth at any cost. It goes back a few things.
Yeah, good.
It's like the first response.
After that one? Where am I? Sorry, I got to do this.
If there are no truth.
Was that one there?
So that's later. It was earlier. Quite a bit earlier.
Okay, how earlier?
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, don't worry, but we can. Yeah, I don't want to throw you off there.
Too late now.
Yeah, right.
Okay,
I
got a
think it was right after this
truth and virtue.
one. No, tell the truth without ceasing to be generous.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It was after speak truth and graciousness.
Yeah, I can't tell by these.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do we approach these things? Let's go here. How is truth and virtue, uniqueness of the message? So, the first thing that you have to think of is that if we look at reaching individuals, that every individual needs a guide, right? Besides the Holy Spirit. And there's certain things you think of, like if you were, I'll choose a less violent sport. If you were a fisherman or you liked to fish, you wanted to learn how to fish, it would be good if you had a guide to tell you where to fish, when to fish, what kind of tackle you need to catch fish, what kind of bait you would need. So that person would be a guide. You know, in golf, a good caddy just doesn't carry your bags. A good caddy knows the lie of every hole you come to. They know where all the places are that go the wrong direction. When you get up on the green, they know how the ground slopes. So they're really being a guide for you. If you go to a museum, say like if you go to the Vatican, I would highly recommend that you find a good um, a good guide to take you through it, because there is too much information to ever get through it, certainly in one day. You probably need a week to go through the whole thing. And you need someone who could tell you, you need someone to tell you the importance of what these things mean. And when we're looking at leading someone to the Lord or helping them, helping them to understand how to do that, how to find the Lord, you need to know how to be a guide to help that person what's important and what's not important. You know, what are the things that are going to help that person find Jesus and make a commitment to Jesus? And if you get into a discussion on Bible literacy, you're probably on a diversion somewhere. If the question comes up, you know, do you believe in a literal Adam? You know, really depends who I'm talking to whether I will answer that question. If it's someone who's seeking Jesus, or I know that there's a place in their life that I could lead this person, that's a discussion I would just push to the side and say, we'll get to that. That's not like a primary question here. So a good guide knows what are the things to look for. And spoiler alert again, everybody has a treasure in their heart. And it's the way that they make sense of reality. It's what they depend on to get them through this day, to get them through the next thing. And discovering that is really what you want to get to. Because before they can believe in something new, they have to disbelieve in that. So when we say a time for questions, that's for both of you. there's a time when people have to ask you questions, and then there's a time that you can ask them questions. And you ask the questions, generally I follow the tactics rule. You ask, when someone makes a statement, you ask for particular words that they use, what do you mean by that? When they say to me, why do you believe in God? I say, what do you mean by God? I want to know what your view of God is. I don't just say, oh yeah, I believe in God, because I don't know if that's what he thinks God is. So I want to say, tell me what you think by that. And if they make a comment, I want to know, how'd you come to that conclusion? How did you, if they say, well, God is causes too much or allows too much evil in the world. Well, how'd you come to that conclusion? Is it by just seeing what's out there? Seeing that there's a lot of evil in the world? There's a lot of things that are hard to reconcile? Yeah. And I'm consciously aware I don't have all the answers. I have more questions than I have answers. And there's only one person who has all the answers. And it ain't you, and it ain't me. And so I don't get defeated by that. If it can be found, I will go search for it. But there are some things you just don't know, and you won't know until you meet Jesus. There are a lot of those why this questions that we just won't know. So there's a time for questions and a time for answers. Time for answers is you can get the Bible out and find answers in the Bible, or you can read another book and find answers in it. When I found this book by Oskin, it's a long journey home, I think it is. I should probably look and see or have it more. I just got it yesterday. I thought this is a great book to give to somebody who's questioning. It's also a good book for me to read to understand the journey that he mentions, at least in here, so I can find the answers. And then there's a time for evidences. Is the Bible the only place you can find evidence for the life of Jesus? Is there any evidence for the empty tomb outside of the Bible? Can you show the existence of God by science, using science, or just reason? There's the whole list of things that you could do. Were the eyewitnesses that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote about, are they credible? Because the credibility, let's say it this way, the reliability of the New Testament is dependent on the credibility of the eyewitnesses. If the eyewitnesses are not credible, then the reliability is really suspect. But if you can show that they were credible eyewitnesses, then you can show that the New Testament, at least the New Testament, is reliable. The reliability of the New Testament is there. And again, you got to read some stuff. You got to find the evidence for it. J. Warner Wallace does a fantastic job in his book, the case, Cold Case Christianity, where he uses his detective skills to show you how to solve a cold case. And if you haven't seen any of his Dateline, any of his Dateline shows where he solved a murder that's 30 years old, where the eyewitnesses are all dead, and just finds evidence to convict somebody of it. It just shows you. His latest book, A Person of Interest, I would say that's another must-read. It's a fantastic book. The amount of research he did to write this is just overwhelming. And I think when you get to that place, when people make comments, the Bible's unreliable, been copied so many times, you have to have the ability to contest that, to at least not let people go away using that as their escape hatch. A lot of apologetics is just learning how to seal up the escape hatches. You don't give people pause to think those things. And then finally, there's the time for commitment. We have to be willing when we find somebody who's heard the evidences and know the right time to ask people if they're willing to make a commitment, because I believe they have a free will to turn on their heel and run almost at any time. They'll turn and run before they'll bow their knee. And we've got to realize those things still happen. But yeah, so a time for questions, a time for answers, a time for evidences, and a time for commitments. Those are the things that we've got to realize, that we can take people through these things. And this is not hard and fast. This is not 4 points to lead somebody to Jesus. They're just a working schematic or list that you could deal with and recognize they're always there. How do you know someone's seeking? They're asking questions. And then you've got to discern whether they are real seekers or browsers. They're just browsing. They're not really seeking. And it's not until you start to show evidence for what they're really what's making them get up out of bed in the morning and challenge that until they disbelieve that, they're never going to make a commitment to Jesus. Because that's always their safeguard. And that's generally how that works. Okay, so there you have it. That's the end of part 2. And again, I just want to mention how these subjects, we could have done 4 hours or 6 hours on this, really to unpack it. They're just to get you interested, give you some tools for evangelism, for conversation, dialogue, and you can always come back to raysiervo.com. You can email me at info@raysiervo.com, and I'll always answer. And look for my private page, Apologetics for the Rest of Us Private, and you can request to join the group. In there, it's a safe place where we can talk about things that you struggle with concerning apologetics or someone you're talking to. Perhaps I can help you.